Alright, hello everyone, and welcome back to another Mirror Dungeon video. Today we're using both the she identities and the you, because they're both the identities that gain benefits from being at less than 50% health. I did a video like this before with the middle characters, and basically the whole premise of this is going into the Mirror Dungeon and beating it with only the ego gifts that benefit these specific identities. So for the she, that's the Resolution ego gift, and for the you, it's the Blood Flame sword. Both of them effectively do the same thing, with it capping their health out at 50% health, basically. So they cannot heal beyond 50%, and they are permanently given their low health threshold conditionals. It also reduces the amount of healing they gain by about 50% as well, so it becomes harder for them to actually heal when they do take damage. And most importantly, it reduces the amount of damage they take by 75% for the she and 50% for the you. They're very powerful ego gifts. And also the you have another added benefit where they gain self-burn on the first turn, but that's kind of weak. It doesn't really do much, because all it does is it gives Sinclair Wrath and Gluttony damage up on the following turn, and it doesn't really do anything for Heathcliff because he already gains a metric ton of self-burn him by just playing normally, basically. So it doesn't really, like, the self-burn on the turn start doesn't really help very much. But anyways, as you can clearly see, we're actually not starting on floor 1. This is actually the last floor, floor 5, and this is pretty much the only fight I'm going to be showing because it just takes so long. And that brings me to a pretty big point when it comes to these identities. And that is the fact that they honestly don't really do that much damage. I mean, for the she identities, with the exception of Ishmael, because she's the only one that's actually really good, the reason they don't do much damage is because, you know, Don Quixote is a Season 1 identity, and therefore she just doesn't have any coins or damage conditionals, so her damage is just not modified at all. She's just doing the raw base damage that the coin power, that the coin roll does, and basically nothing else. So she's definitely the weakest of all of the identities here. And then Faust is, she's Faust. Incredibly weak. She just can't build a poise stack, and if you want to play into her gimmick, then you have to waste for like 4 turns doing nothing. It's just, she's not good, to say the least. Ishmael's decent because she has the 4 coin skill too when she's below 50% health, but also, just like with Don Quixote, she doesn't have any real damage modifiers, beyond of course poise, which is something that she can actually build up and maintain. So it's like, she does have technically a 20% damage bonus because she's always critting, but other than that, it's like, she's a Season 1 identity still. As good as she is, she'll never be able to compete with the Season 9 identities of the 3-page Yi Song fake Black Silence identity that's coming out real soon. But then you have the you identities, right? And they're Canto 8 identities, right? And you would think they do a lot of damage. And you are right, they do a lot of damage. But the problem is, most of their damage comes from their skill 3. Like, their skill 2 can do a decent amount of damage, much like how Ishmael has her 4-coin skill 2. They also have a 4-coin skill 2. However, just like with Ishmael, their skill 2 doesn't really have any damage modifiers, so it's basically just doing the exact same raw damage that the regular damage roll does, without any extra bonuses there. And so because of that, it makes it so that their skill 3 is actually their main source of damage. And you know, that's not that bad, because it is a very strong attack, don't get me wrong. But its problem is the fact that both of their skill 3s, Sinclair and Heathcliff, they have Unfocused Volley. And that makes it so that they do good damage against lots of weak enemies or a single strong enemy. But if you're in a fight like this, where every single enemy has over 500 health, basically, and each one of your coins only do like 10 damage, then yeah, it's like you're not going to be doing very much damage to anybody, and thus it takes forever to do anything, basically. And so it's like, as strong as the U are, they are not very good single target damage in fights like this one, where there's lots of enemies that are particularly powerful. And because of that, we end up struggling quite a bit. Or not really struggling, but it takes forever. And then we do end up struggling, actually, because in this fight, there is a lot of unbreakable coins, bleed damage, rupture damage, and so on. And most of that extra damage from bleed and even Heathcliff's self-burn, it makes it so that these characters cannot maintain themselves very well. They just constantly keep taking chip damage and rupture, burn, and bleed damage. They all completely ignore pretty much our only main benefit of the 2 ego gifts we're using, in that we take reduced damage. Because that only reduces the damage taken from the actual raw damage of the skills. It does nothing against status effects. And that's why right here we're kind of spamming Faust's ego skill in order to heal her, because, well, frankly speaking, I wasn't paying attention to her bleed stack, and I let it get out of control to the point where it would kill her if I did not give her extra healing. But yeah, it's a very difficult fight. Anyways, something else that's worth talking about is the fact that Heathcliff specifically, he has both a she identity and a you identity, so it's like, which one do you want to use in this team, right? And personally, I would prefer to use his she identity, because, I don't know, I think the she are cooler, in my opinion. But, unfortunately, what really tipped me over the edge to use you Heathcliff instead is the fact that he just has cooler animations, honestly. Like, I have nothing against she Heathcliff, but being a Season 1 identity, he's not very flashy. And Heathcliff's Enhanced Skill 3, you Heathcliff's Enhanced Skill 3, I should say, is just so unbelievably satisfying with how fast he attacks. And that alone is pretty much the only reason why I'm using him instead of the she. But this fight would be even more miserable if I did take she Heathcliff, because he has the same problem as the other she identities, where he's a Season 1 identity, so he can't really do any real damage because he doesn't have any damage modifiers. And perhaps even worse is the fact that he does damage to himself. And, you know, that's the same thing that you Heathcliff does with his self-burn. But the difference is that she Heathcliff has no way to heal himself, whereas you Heathcliff does, because he heals himself every time he uses his Enhanced Skill 3. Doesn't really make that much of a difference, but it just makes it so that you Heathcliff is much more sustainable in these longer fights. And as such, I probably would never even take this floor if I was using she Heathcliff. Of course, part of the reason why I took it in the first place was because, I don't know, Cancer Weight just feels more fitting for these identities, in my opinion. Also, rest in peace Faust. She tried her best, but the 5% had something to say about that. And after I tried so hard to save her life as well. Sometimes you just can't avoid fate, I suppose. In any case, this is actually my second time attempting this fight. Or I should say this run. Because the first time I did this run, it was actually... I did take this same floor, but we got a different fight. We got the one against the Shi family instead of this fight right here. And that was an even worse fight, because specifically the second boss in it, his whole gimmick is that every time he ends up at low health, he absorbs one of his minions to heal himself for like 400 health or whatever. And that's a pretty big problem when he has like 6 other minions and you cannot do any good single target damage. And more importantly than that, Heathcliff can't even attack him because he keeps using an NV counter skill that will absolutely annihilate Heathcliff if he even thinks about touching the guy. So yeah, simply put, I kind of got sort of soft-locked in that fight because the guy kept healing. I couldn't do any damage to him without killing Heathcliff. And I had to basically I had to restart the run. And this time, like, the first time I attempted it, the main difference was the fact that I didn't actually pick up the one starter buff, whatever it's called, the one that gives you the clash power, speed, protection, and damage up. I didn't take that the first time, but the damage was so unbelievably slow without that extra 20% damage. Like, you have no idea. It was miserable. It took me like an hour to get through that fight, and I didn't even win. So yeah, just imagine how slow this fight would be without that extra 20% damage bonus from that starter buff. Absolutely miserable fight here. I also kind of wanted to beat it without using any egos as well, because it's kind of more fitting if an identity can beat a fight without relying on anything other than themselves. At least that's in my opinion, but as soon as Faust got that bleed stack, I kind of threw that out of the window, because she would have absolutely died without using any of the healing egos, so. The choice was basically use egos or let Faust die, and I didn't want Faust to die, even though she ended up dying anyways. Oh well. This last fight against Pan is actually kind of the easiest of them all, and also it's one where I kind of learned a little bit more about how this fight actually works, which is kind of interesting because like this fight's kind of a bit of a pushover, to be honest. And it's this skill right here, his jump-in skill, where he basically uses that, and then one of the jar monsters basically suicides themselves to do a tiny bit of damage and debuff you as well. And it's like, I didn't even know that was a thing, to be honest. And it's kind of interesting, because you can actually take advantage of it and make it so that either the specific jar monsters that are at lower health don't actually trigger. Like, if you can kill them before he does it, then it will send in one of the jar monsters that are at full health instead. And thus you can basically avoid attacking them at all, and they'll still just die. So it's very nice if you have low damage like this team in particular, to be able to really get through the jar monsters as quickly as possible. Of course, Pan does resummon them after a time, but like right here, it shows just how good the U are at single target damage. But the second you get a second enemy in the fight for their indiscriminate targeting to attack, it's like Yeah, the damage immediately falls off because they're only doing like 50% damage to the single target that you actually care about doing the damage to. I mean, Heathcliff does 300 damage right there, but if there was even a single jar monster on the field at this point, then it probably would only do like 150 damage against Pan. So it's like indiscriminate targeting is just probably one of the worst damage debuffs you could possibly have in a fight for an identity. And it's fine because indiscriminate targeting is kind of cool. But yeah, you add a second enemy into the fight and it just... the damage dealt to a single target falls off a cliff. Kind of why I'm not really worried about Yisong's new fake Roland identity, because since his Furiosa has indiscriminate targeting, it's like, you add a second enemy and it's just not going to do any damage. I mean, it's a 9-coin skill, so it's like having that many coins, it's enough to make sure that it's actually doing good damage to a single target, but yeah. Without being able to guarantee the character you're attacking, the damage is kind of terrible. The U try to get around that by having it so that they deal a percentage of the final coin's damage to every target. But the problem is that only happens on their final coin of the skill. And because it's a percentage of the final coin skill, it's like if you have only a single target who's staggered and you don't end up hitting that staggered target with the final coin, then because the other guys are not going to be taking, you know, ×2 damage to the attack, unless of course they're fatal to slash damage, it's like, yes, you're doing 20% damage, but if you had hit that guy, you would have been doing more damage anyway, so it's... Indiscriminate targeting is a weird effect. It's both good and terrible at the same time.
완벽한 승리 축하드립니다, 아가씨. 이 정도의 성과라면 4대 가문의 자제들도 인정할 수밖에 없을 겁니다.
좋은 수업 덕분이지. 배운 게 많았어.
그러게 왜 앞에 튀어나와? 더 죽일 게 안 남아서 홧김에 죽여버렸잖아. 뭐냐? 너희들도 좀 부족했나 보지? 아, 다 덤벼!
And that's how I beat Mirror Dungeon 6 hard, using only the she identities and the you identities. I'm gonna be honest, I do like the challenge of restricting myself to only using, like, a very, very small amount of ego gifts. But perhaps I need to think more about the actual fights I take, because goddamn, that one was absolutely miserable, let me just say that much. I mean, granted, part of it was because the identities that I specifically chose just didn't do a lot of damage in the first place, but yeah, they just took forever to kill anything at all. And it doesn't help the fact that all of the enemies in that fight in particular were super tanky, so those two things combined together made it an absolute slog to get through. But anyways, they're still good identities at the end of the day. At least Ishmael and the U identities are. But that's it for me. Like and subscribe for more videos like this one, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.